Well, then it sounds to me, though, that then this is an extraordinary reimbursement, meaning it's not your typical type of reimbursement that would necessarily be expended through one department, any particular department.
Absolutely. It's an extraordinary request, as the chief indicated.
I would think that anytime you have an extraordinary reimbursement, something that's different, something that doesn't fit the norm, something that is absolutely department-specific, whether it's the police department or Parks and Recreation or the street department, for that matter, that if it's going to be carried over, it would be carried over for that particular department. If it cannot be identified as being specifically related to a reimbursement from that department.
Well, again, it's not a refund. Our general fund departments are general governmental departments. They come under the rubric, if you will, or the umbrella of the general fund.
Okay, then once again, how do you prioritize who's going to get that money?
It typically is not requested.
Okay.
Typically, it's carried over and allocated to capital in the following year.
Walter, thank you.
I think we're getting into accounting semantics. You could just as easily have a refunds and reimbursements account under each department in the city. Could you not?
I suppose.
Instead, we just have one, and they all go into it, as you have said.
If it's general fund related, yes.
But you could just as easily have one under the Parks Department, the Arts Department, the Police Department, the Fire Department, etc. If we had a lot of them coming in all the time, and if we wish to set it up that way, you could certainly do that. Is that not correct?
You could. Don can tell you that if it's general fund, you wouldn't set it up.
I didn't ask if you would. I said you could.
You could, in the revenue side, you could put refunds and reimbursements, administration, refunds and reimbursements.
Correct. That was my point. So, and this was generated, and this isn't a question, it's just a statement. This was generated because of activities of the police department. It was generated because the police officers were out there facing an unknown situation where citizens were protesting and making themselves known about something they weren't happy with. But at least in the first one or two nights of this thing, they didn't know what they were faced with. I mean, they were literally, they got their battle bags to be prepared. It's better to be prepared than to be hurt. And they didn't know, and they've had around the country and as close as Seattle and the WTO riots and whatever, starts out as people aren't happy, we're going to make noise, we're going to carry signs, and before you know it, you've got a situation that gets out of control. So I realize the source of the funds. I think the police department has been creative in seeing a need for a $20,000 odd expense and identifying a $20,000 odd source of funds that could be used to take care of that. A question for Chief Duke, if I may. The PD remodel and other PD budget request. There's been some talk about prioritization. Where does this need for new, for lack of a better term, riot gear fall in terms of things? And what brought this to the fore in terms of looking at the PD remodel, other PD budget requests?
We did look at some of the goals, and they were submitted in the process itself, but we would anticipate outfitting our regular riot gear trained officers with this in a budget process where $42,000 or up to $8,000 would be requested each year, but we thought this would be a one-time only opportunity to present this exchange to spend this money on this gear since it is needed and it's reaching its life expectancy. And this way we could protect all of us.
Another question?
Not at this time.
Yeah, just for clarification then, so by expending this money, you still would need another
4,200.
6 sets.
6 sets.
Another 6 sets.
Yes.
Which you'd ask for in the 13 budget.
Which is currently in our budget request now that will come before you.
Okay.
And that would complete all current officer positions.
Yes.
I know Mayor Cheney is in the audience, and I assume she, since we have a memo before us, would want to make a comment or two. Is that incorrect? Or yes, ma'am, please.
Well, I think everybody around this table wants our police officers to be as reasonably well equipped as possible, to be as safe as possible. You heard the chief make a distinction between ballistic vests and the riot gear that's being sought here, different equipment. If this is a priority for the department, then I would like to have seen that presented among all the other budget requests by this department and the others, so that we can weigh them together. And I don't have a particular opposition to acquiring riot gear for our police department, although, as Gary mentioned, we have no knowledge of having had a riot here. There was the response to Pullman, of course. But looking at the fact the police department has a variety of needs, and if this one didn't rise to the level of those others, then it's somewhere lower than that. Does it relate to our need for street resurfacing, or for our youth recreation scholarships, or for our sidewalk repairs for ADA accessibility? There are a lot of competing interests within the city, and if they are presented as priorities, I absolutely pay attention to those, as I've paid attention to the council's priorities. And I apologize, and I've apologized to the chief as well. I was unaware of this request until it came out in your packets on Friday afternoon. And so I prepared this memo over the weekend, and I did ask the city supervisor for clarification, and I did find out that he in fact had heard the request early on, but it wasn't even presented to me in the budget discussion. So I took that to mean it's not top of the list priority for the department. I'm happy to have the chief and the police administration prioritize this among the other requests too, so that we can consider that how this almost $20,000 might best be processed.
Chief, did I understand this was in your initial budget request for 2013?
Yes, it was.
And refresh my memory why it came out.
It came out because there was the discussion was had about the alternative. There might be a way to fund it other than and minimize the impacts on the FY13 budget.
And is what's before us at this moment an alternative?
Absolutely. But whether it's an alternative, as the chief and I discussed, whether the council wants to authorize that is up to the council. But that's when it gets down to, and I don't want to give the police the impression, and certainly not Chief Duke, if there had not been an alternative, it might have met the preliminary cut in the budget. However, as an alternative presented itself, we chose to move forward with minimization to the FY13 budget.
Yeah, as I had suggested earlier, I thought it was darn creative thinking, and I still think that. Mayor Cheney, yes, ma'am.
One of the items that is in the budget request is non-lethal force, the things like beanbags and the kind of gas bombs and the rubber bullets, or those types of things that are non-lethal for these kinds of responses potentially as well. And so that might legitimately have made the call. Maybe the mobile data units. There are a lot of police requests that could have come forward in this also. And as I say, it was not brought to my attention. I think had other departments known there was $20,000 sitting around that they could put forward in their budgets, they would have done so as well. But realistically, this will be $20,000 that we're going to have to take out of somewhere in fiscal year 13 budget. So
well, it has become a priority for the chief all of a sudden. At least we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it if it hadn't. I think you were first, Wayne, and then...
I think the discussion of non-lethal items is an important discussion. But I think it's an important discussion from the standpoint of this is especially what our police department attempts to do, is through our community policing program, utilizing non-lethal, utilizing the least amount of force necessary to affect the outcome of the situation.